Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the two state Senate special elections that took place in Pennsylvania on Tuesday night. I'm here to tell you what happened, what they mean, and most importantly, what you should know and take away from these results. So, just some background or refresher, or just in case you missed it, which, hey, I don't blame you for. These are state Senate elections, so often these don't get very much media attention, and as you can see, the turnout was quite low. There were two vacancies in the Pennsylvania state legislature. One was in the state house, and the other was in the state senate. The one in the state house was held by the Democratic Party. This was a seat that Kamala Harris won by around 16% in 2024, November. Biden won it by a couple points more in 2020, around, I think, a 20-point margin. And as we can see here, the Democrats got a pretty big win. They won by over 28%, notching a 12.5-point overperformance of Vice President Harris's victory here in this district back in 2024. So that was definitely a good result for Democrats. And then in the 36th Senate districts, this is a bigger sample size here, as you can see by the vote count. We got well over 5 times as many votes, or roughly 5 times as many votes actually cast here. And again, as you can see, it was a very close race. It came down to just 482 votes. So in case you're wondering, no, the Libertarian candidate did not spoil this for the Republicans. The Democrat, even if you give every single Libertarian vote to the Republican, the Democrat would have still won by 2 votes here. But it was, not to take away from how close it was. But again, this is a seat that was close this time, but it voted for Trump by 15 last November. So we saw about a 15-point shift to the GOP, or to the Democrats, really a 16-point shift actually, towards the Democrats in this race. Now, I did say at the beginning of the video that special elections tend to be overlooked. They don't really get a ton of media coverage, and for good reason. These are local elections. It's not like there was a statewide Senate seat in Pennsylvania that was up for grabs. It was just a state Senate seat that flipped from red to blue. But I think it's still good to talk about, and again, it is election off season. It's, kind of what I like to say is that this is the post-draft, pre-training camp time of elections. If you're an NFL fan, I guess there's no good equivalent to the draft or training camp, but I would just say that this is kind of the most quiet time in politics, even though it certainly doesn't feel that way. And what we are seeing is that Democrats, despite a very underwhelming November 2024, continue to be strong in special elections. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is special elections and why in recent years they have kind of lended themselves to Democratic overperformances. And this really comes down to the fact that the Democratic coalition is very high propensity. We saw this kind of in the midterms where Democrats did better than expected, basically all across the board back in 2022. And that was because Democratic turnout, even though it could have been a lot better in certain states, was sufficient. It was good enough. It wasn't as good as 2018, but it was a lot better than 2010. It was a lot better than 2014. And that is in part because the Democratic Party now is more college educated and more suburbanite more wealthy compared to 10 years ago, compared to the Obama years, right? And the Republicans, on the other hand, kind of because this is a zero-sum game, they've gotten less college educated. They've gotten more rural and more working class, and actually a bit more urban. That is certainly true. And they've gotten a bit less wealthy. We've seen that even though the wealth, kind of the wealth bracket of the country, I don't want to say that because that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but like, the way we divide our country in terms of wealth, like lower class, lower middle class, or middle class, wealthy, etc., or rich, etc. Even though these blocks haven't become nearly as polarized as, say, different educational demographics, where we've seen, like I said, college-educated voters swing to the left and non-college educated voters swing to the right. There has been a bit of a trend where wealthy voters are swinging towards Democrats, even though it is not as pronounced as the swing that has occurred in, college graduates versus non-college graduates. But what I'm getting at here is that this is a high-propensity coalition, and when I say that, I mean that these voters are more likely to be in tune with the news. They're more likely to know there is a special election happening, because let's face it, oftentimes these special elections are under-discussed, and if you're busy or if you don't care about politics, you might not know that there's a special election happening in your district, right? like, I know this is happening because I'm a crazy person who looks at special elections in Pennsylvania. That is not the case for the majority of voters, as great as that would be, because then we'd have 100% turnout, but that's not the case. So the Democrats in recent years have done really well in special elections because their coalition is broadly more tuned into politics than the Republican coalition is. And this was not the case, say, back when Mitt Romney ran for president in 2012 or when John McCain ran for president in 2008, but it's become the case more and more in the Trump era, especially post-2020. And that's why even in 2023 and 2024, which were both years where Joe Biden was unpopular, which were both years where Democrats were likely on track to lose the next big election, what we saw was that the Democratic Party in special elections and even in big elections in 2023, like the gubernatorial elections, their turnout was good and they overperformed. They did well in those elections, which led a lot of people, partially myself, I will admit to this, to overstate Democratic support in the 2024 presidential election, right? And so since the Republicans now have a coalition that is less reliable for turnout, we get results like this. That's what I'm getting at with this kind of long discussion, is we get results like this. Or even in red-leaning districts like this, I wouldn't call this a deep red district, but it's definitely red-leaning. Trump won it by 16 points last November, 15 points last November. Democrats, because their turnout falls off by less, they can put themselves in a better position to win, right? So even though the electorate in this district voted for Trump by 15 in November, the electorate that actually showed up might have only voted for Trump by 5, right? Like the voters that showed up, if you polled them how they voted last November, they might have only voted for Trump by 5. And at that point, it gets a lot easier to win, because to win as a Democrat in a Trump plus 5 seat, different ballgame from winning in a Trump plus 15 seat. Now, with that being said, I don't want to take away from the victory that James Malone, the Democrat, had here. James Malone, likely based on preliminary reporting, did win over some Republican voters, at least registered Republican voters. We saw that Pennsylvania does upload their mail-in voting statistics every, basically every day, I think, except for Sundays, although I might be wrong about that, but the point stands. And what we saw was that Malone outperformed the he did better than you'd expect if every registered Democrat who mailed in their ballot voted for him and every registered Republican mailed in their ballot voted for his opponent. So we saw that there was some crossover, at least from Republicans who mailed in their ballots. Election day voting, we don't know. But in terms of registered Republicans who mailed in their ballots, a good chunk of them, or not a good chunk, but a number of them did vote for the Democrats. And that was clear. So, this is those two factors gave Malone the win. The other factor is that it's a Republican administration, and the general conventional wisdom of politics, which I think is a little bit overrated and a little bit oversimplified, but I might just be kind of a curmudgeon, is that the party out of power does better in off-year elections. That's the rule of thumb. When there's a Democrat in the White House, the Republicans do well in the midterms, and vice versa. And so this is kind of like a midterm in the sense that it's an off-year election or not an off-year election, but a non-presidential election, I should say, with one party in power, the other party doing better. So that's part of it too. So these factors made it possible for Malone to win. And this is a good performance for Democrats. I did not think they were going to win this race. I read about this election about a week before it happened, and I expected Malone to do better than Kamala Harris did because of the turnout dynamics I described at the beginning of the video. Democrats more likely to turn out, but I didn't think he'd win. I thought maybe he'd lose by 6 or 7, right? But Democrats turned out. Republicans didn't really, at least to the same extent. And we got some persuasion for Malone, and that's enough to cook up a Democratic victory in a Republican-leaning district. And I didn't talk much about this district, but it's kind of the same story. I think the electorate was probably a bit bluer than the presidential electorate, and there was probably some persuasion that benefited the Democratic candidate, although I know less about this race than this race because this race was not close at all. So, most importantly, what should you take away? I've told you what happened. I've told you why it happened. I've told you kind of what that has broadly meant in politics for the past few years, but what should you take away? And I think if you're a Democrat watching this video, and Democrats actually have kind of celebrated this victory a little bit, which, I don't say this in a tongue-in-cheek way. I genuinely mean this. Democrats have not had a good past 12 months. I think it's reasonable they celebrate this, right? Celebrate the victories, whether they're big or small. But I think that Democrats should not get too excited about this because they did this in 2023 and they did this in 2024. Not to the same extent, to be fair, but they still did it. They were able to outperform pretty consistently across the board in a number of special elections. And in the 2023 gubernatorial elections, Democrats did quite well in Kentucky and Mississippi. And so those results were a little misleading. They were more localized, certainly, but they were a little misleading. And they're a little weird to think about in the in the kind of reality now that we live in post 2024. And so Democrats, they should be happy with this, but they should exercise a great deal of caution because they have performed before. They didn't do well in the 2024 presidential election. And so another part of this is that, like I said earlier, a lot of this is turnout. This is not, the same electorate from November 2024 coming out and saying, we are now going to vote for a Democrat. Maybe a few Trump voters came out and voted for James Malone, right? It's definitely likely based on what happened. But more likely than not, what really happened was more Democrats turned, proportionally the Democratic turnout fell less than the Republican turnout. And that's why Malone won this race. So I think the takeaway here should be, yes, Democrats got a big win here and that, they should be happy about that. But this doesn't mean much when you consider, how this similar things happened before 2024 and it didn't end up mattering for Kamala Harris. And B, the very nature of this victory suggests pretty strongly that this was not a Trump voter-led repudiation of Republican candidates like Josh Parsons. It was a Democratic turnout advantage coupled with a small persuasion kind of boost that got James Malone over the line. So that's what I think happened here. I will keep watching special elections. I'll keep updating you. And again, Pennsylvania is a swing state. So, this isn't like a random local, board of supervisors of the school district election in Hennepin, or that's not a bad example because Minnesota's kind of close, in, Kona, Hawaii, right? What it was really was an election in a swing state that it has implications. Democrats did, they didn't hold on to a seat; they actually flipped a seat. But at the end of the day, what's really, really important here is that this was a small turnout election. It's a small sample size, and I think that as I've described, the dynamics here were favorable to Democrats, and that is the takeaway. That should be the takeaway. So let me know what you all think. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you all in the next video.